Hello, everybody. How you doing today? This is Santiago, Valencia. Thank you very much for stopping by. We are going to get started on our fourth episode in a series that I started when it comes to building an orchestral template from the ground up. If you haven't checked out those episodes, I invite you to do so. There'll be some links here on the upper side of the corners of the window, so you can check out episode 1, 2, and 3. But let's go ahead and recap, and let's talk a little bit about what we've done so far to bring us up to what we're going to be talking about today. So our first episode, we talked a lot about file structure. We want to be organized when it comes to knowing where all our MIDI files are, audio files, etc., etc. So we talked about file structure in our first episode. Secondly, we started talking about in Cubase, we were working Cubase Pro. We were talking about our divide track where I am separating the upper part of the track window to give us a little bit more organization. So we always know where we are depending on what we're scoring. And that aligns with all the music that we're writing. So that's episode number 2. Episode number 3, we talked about using Spitfire Audio's Albion 1. We started adding instrument tracks into our template where every instrument had its own individual articulation put on its own individual instrument track there. Then we went ahead and talked about color coding them and going even further by organizing them in a folder. So I invite you to check those out as well. So that brings us up to today. We have a lot to cover today. It's going to be pretty detailed today. So let's go ahead and get started. So let's talk a little bit about what we're actually going to be going over today. Today, we're going to be doing a more detailed view on how to make sure that your alignment works with all your tracks in your template, even if you're using a combination of different libraries from different sample studios, okay? So it doesn't all just have to be Spitfire Audio. It could be 8DO, it could be orchestral tools, etc. Okay, so we want to make sure no matter where we get our libraries, that we want to make sure that they all align correctly within our template so that we don't have to keep going back and forth after every session, after every composition and trying to align, because that would just take forever. So we want to kind of like do that from the get-go. So we're going to be talking about that. Also, we're going to be adding some tweaks so that we help them all relatively sound close in volume to one another, depending on whether they're pizzicatos, longs, shorts, it doesn't really matter. We want to kind of relatively get them in the same volume space so that we, again, don't have to keep going back and tweaking, because that can cost us a lot of time, especially when we're up against a deadline, okay? And then finally, we're going to go ahead and start talking about how you can go ahead and save some processing power, and even probably more important, on how you can go ahead and save some memory with your computer. A lot of people are working with laptops and sometimes have a limited amount of memory, sometimes 16, 32, sometimes even 8 or less gigs, right? So we want to make sure that we're not overtaxing our computer systems because everything is just going to really crash. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that at the end. So that's pretty much what's on the agenda today. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so before we get into our DAW and pick up where we left off last time, I actually want to talk to you a little bit about samples and how they're actually recorded orchestrally, okay? Because understanding that gives us a little bit more understanding on what we're actually going to go ahead and do in the DAW right now. So it'll make things a lot easier once you understand the process on how things are actually recorded. So here's how it goes. No matter what studio is recording it, whether it's Spitfire Audio, Orchestral Tools, Cinesamples, etc., when they are recording an orchestra, okay, they'll be putting mics around the room. Outrigger mics, tree mics. They'll put a mic for that particular section of instruments. They might even put specific mics pointed towards an individual player, depending on what they're recording. Okay, so now when they're recording these articulations, let's say they're doing a long or a short or a pizzicato, it doesn't really matter. When they're recording these, they'll finish recording and put them in and start slicing them up, okay? So let's talk about a long, right? It's a long note that might last, let's say 5 seconds. So at the beginning of that recording, okay, they're going to go ahead and slice the beginning and slice the end. But at the very beginning of the recording, there might be a small amount of time where nothing is happening, okay, before the note actually is heard by our ears. And that small amount of time, we need to compensate for that amount of time. So let's pretend in this particular case that we're talking about 50 milliseconds, okay? And let's pretend that Spitfire audio recorded that and gave about 50 milliseconds, right? Well, orchestral tools might have done it differently. They might have done 25 milliseconds or even 100 milliseconds. So there's more space there at the beginning before you actually start hearing the note, right? So we have to compensate for that amount of dead space at the beginning of each sample before we start hearing it, right? So we have to take care of that in our DAW. So this could happen with various, studios, like I mentioned, orchestral tools, Spitfire audio, etc. But even with, let's say, Spitfire audio and Albion 1, is it possible that even within a library like Albion 1, there is differences of that dead space at the beginning? There can be, okay? So we have to make sure and go through with a fine-tooth comb and make sure that everything is we can go ahead and compensate for that dead space at the beginning. Why do we want to do this? Because that once you bring in another library into, or even another sound patch or whatever, we want to make sure that orchestrally everything's lining up and everything's hitting right on the downbeat, right? But if we are dealing with different libraries or different studios, that dead space at the beginning might be very different. So when we're playing, we hear like, oh, okay, the strings are going down, but then the horns are a little delayed. And then the woodwinds are coming in a little early, right? That's because every single patch, every single sample that we're using has a different amount of dead space at the beginning. So we have to go ahead and take care of that. And that's called delay compensation. Pretty much all DAWs go ahead and you have a little bit of a knob where you can compensate for that. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how we do that in Cubase, and you'll figure out how to do that in Logic or Pro Tools or wherever you're using that, okay? So that's the explanation pretty much on how things are recorded. So once we get into the DAW, which we're going to do right now, we can go ahead and see how we can really fine tune that. So when our template is loaded up with all these delay compensations figured out, we know that no matter what we play, we know that it's going to hit on the downbeat of whatever BPM we're doing, so that we don't have to go back and fix it, because that could be a real big, time waste sort of thing. All right, now getting started with this, sometimes we can take a little bit of a shortcut. If we actually go to the website of wherever we bought our sound library, so in this case, Spitfire Audio, they might have some manuals in there for every library that you've purchased. And within that manual, sometimes there is the number of milliseconds that you should be using to set your delay compensation at. So essentially, they've kind of done our homework for us. Now, this doesn't happen all the time, but if we're lucky, it does, okay? So let me go ahead and show you what I'm talking about. So if I went ahead and I typed in Albion 1 manual for Spitfire Audio in Google and came up with this link. Now, this link is part of the Spitfire Audio site. And on this page, you're going to find a whole mess of the manuals for every library that they sell, if not at least most of them, right? So right here at the very top, you'll find Albion 1, which is great. And I went ahead and clicked on that. And by the way, I'm going to go ahead and put the link to this page in the description so you can check it out yourself. And then once you did that, the manual pops up. Here we are. This is the PDF that shows up. Now I've actually gone ahead and done this already. And on page 15 is probably the information that we are looking for, essentially. Talks about the tightness, CC number 18. And right here, even though it's not giving us any numbers, which again, too bad, but it's talking about that you can go ahead and adjust your delay compensation depending on where you want the sample to start sounding out. So it didn't do our homework for us, but just wanted to give you an idea of where you can start looking for manuals depending on what library you're using for your orchestral sounds. So let's go ahead and get into our DAW, and let me show you how to go ahead and do this manually. Okay, so here we are back in our DAW. This is pretty much how we left our template the last time we worked on it. So I'm gonna go ahead and show you where this delay compensation setting is. If you go up to the upper right-hand corner, if you're not familiar with Cubase, we have these three little buttons on here that allow us to open up these side and bottom panels. So if I go ahead and click on this one, you'll see that on the left-hand side, there is a panel that's been opened up here, which shows us our inspector, our visibility, and if we go down here, it can show us our tracks and our zones, okay? The other thing that we can do here is go ahead and show our lower zone, which it already started showing you right here. And that can be populated by either the mix console, the editor, sampler control, and chord pads. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and leave it in editor for now. And then going back up here, if we go ahead and click on the right, we'll be presented with the right panel, which kind of shows us our VSTIs, our media, control room, our meters, and that could be divided between the master meter and loudness meter over here. Okay, so these are kind of like our side panel, lower panel zones that we're able to pop up, right? So let's go ahead and hide the bottom one and the right one, and we're gonna focus on the one here on the left. So if I have, let's go ahead and select our brass high short here, okay? If I go over here to the left side and see the inspector, we're gonna go ahead and be presented with this very first one. So if you go ahead and look, there are three upper settings here. One's for volume, one's for panning, and this third one here, track delay in multi-seconds. That's the setting what we are looking for, and this is pretty much where you're gonna go ahead and set everything right now. Right now, it's set to 0, okay? But once we start doing this manually, and I'll show you in a moment, we're gonna be adjusting this slider to go to the left, negative 357 milliseconds, or forward, 500 or 493 milliseconds, depending on what we're trying to do. For right now, we're just gonna go ahead and leave it at 0, okay? And then we're gonna go ahead and screw around with this right now. Let me show you how we go ahead and manually figure out what that delay compensation setting should be at, okay? So let's go ahead and take this to the top. We're gonna go ahead and record. I'm gonna put on the click track here as well. All right. Let's go and record. Okay, so I've went ahead and recorded, let's say 8 quarter notes, 2 measures worth. And I did have my auto quantize button here, which is the AQ button here at the bottom, to kind of help me line things up so I don't have to worry about that later. If I go ahead and double click on this region that we just created, our lower region will pop up and our editor is what we need. We can go ahead and see that we've actually recorded these 4 quarter notes. I'm going to go ahead and move them over to the second measure here, just to keep things a little bit simpler, okay? If I go ahead and zoom in, we can pretty much see that they're pretty much lined up exactly right on there, okay? So what I want to do now is I want to turn this into audio, and you'll see why I do this in a moment, but let's go ahead and set this up and create an audio track out of it, okay? So if we go up here at the top under the Edit drop-down menu, we're going to see something called Render in Place, okay? So we're going to go ahead and do that. I've actually set in my situation here the keyboard shortcut of F13 that you can see here, and it's going ahead and render with current settings. So everything that's on that, existing on that track will just be recorded into audio. So let's go ahead and click on that. And you'll see it's rendering in place. And now we have a new track from this first track. It's created this other one. You can see here in parentheses, there's an R, and that basically means that it's been rendered. And if we go ahead and click on this, it looks pretty flat, right? But if I go all the way to the right over here, there's another little button here, little slider that says Divide Track List. Right under that, there's a slider that we can slide up. And you'll see, lo and behold, if we look at the section here, let's widen this over a little bit more. We put it all the way down. It's pretty skinny. And then our waveform starts to build. This does not mean that we're raising the volume, even though it looks like we are. We're just raising the waveform so that we can visually see it. This does not affect the volume, just what we see as far as a waveform, okay? So that's a very confusing thing, so I just want to let you know that. So let's go ahead and do that. We can go ahead and pop that up there. We can zoom in a little bit more. And let's go ahead and take a look at this, okay? So as you can see, our waveform here, probably our sound starts coming in probably maybe around here where my arrow is, okay? And you can see that this area here, there's probably a little bit of a delay. Not much, I grant you, right? But theoretically, if we really wanted to be right on the downbeat of the second measure, it would probably exist somewhere maybe around there, okay? So we're cutting this little area here away. So that's where our delay compensation starts. So if we want it to be kind of like this, then we're going to want to go ahead and screw around with it. So let me show you how to do that. So we're going to go ahead and redo this here. So if we're back to our original short, but if we go to our delay compensation over here and we, let's say, do -50, let me just type that in. So -50 milliseconds. If we click on our original region, and then we turn that into audio. Again, I'm using F13 because that's the way I set it up in my keyboard shortcuts. If I hit F13, it's going to create another waveform. Look at that. See that now? That waveform is now a lot closer to the endpoint, but that might be a little bit too close. That's cutting off a lot right there, in my opinion. So if I go back to my original MIDI and I change my delay compensation, let's go ahead and say do -25. And again, hit F13 to render that into audio. There we go. That's probably a little bit closer right there. Okay, probably a little bit closer. So this shows you the idea of where you have to kind of like tweak things so where your delay compensation really hits that mark, if that's what you want to do, so that all your libraries line up properly and everyone's playing at the exact same time that you want them to. So for right now, for these purposes, we're going to go ahead and leave it at -25. Let me go ahead and select these other two that I created. Right click, and we're going to remove these. So we're just going to go ahead and erase those. And that's pretty much there. Okay, that's pretty much where I would probably want it to have it. Okay, so that means that this brass high short, I'm going to leave at -25 delay compensation. Now, let's go ahead and go to our next one, okay? Let's do our long. In this case, we're just going to need, let me go ahead and copy over this MIDI. So I'm just going to drop this down right here. Make sure that's on the downbeat of measure 2. And on this one here, we're just going to go ahead and get rid of these 2 notes, and we're just going to go ahead and select these, drag them out like that, so that we're going to get 2 measures of whole notes here, or, a dotted half note here in this case, right? All right, let's go ahead and select this region, hit F13. We're going to render that into audio and see where we stand. So if I zoom in here a little bit more, let's see how that goes. Now remember, we're using a new one, so our delay compensation on this brass high long is at 0. We haven't done anything to adjust it. Okay. And that's pretty close. Very, very close as far as what we're seeing here. Okay. Would we want to adjust this? That's up to you. I might adjust this just a hair. So I might actually send this to maybe a -15 milliseconds, maybe. Let's do 18. We'll split the difference. Okay. -18. Okay. Now, if I select this MIDI region again, if hit F13, render it, we can see that that's pretty much, yeah, I like that. So this one, I'm going to go ahead, this long, I'm going to go ahead and leave it -18 milliseconds for delay compensation. So the idea now here is to go through every single one. If the manual doesn't give you the numbers for each individual instrument or instrument's articulation, you might have to do this with every single track. But again, once you've set this up, there's probably, and it's saved in your template, there's probably no reason for you to have to go back, and pretty much everything's going to line up really, really nicely. Now you can see with Spitfire audio, they're really, really close. And me, I might be nitpicking a little bit. And this is depending on how you want it to be. Now, if you want to hit that note and you want to maybe drag things, right, then you might want to select the delay compensation positive as opposed to negative. So that's delaying it even more by putting it in the positive. By putting it in the negative, I'm bringing that sample come in a little early so that I hear it pretty much right on the downbeat, if that makes any sense, okay? So this is how we go ahead and do things manually. So I'm gonna go ahead and go through each individual track that we have here that we've set up so far and set up my delay compensation, and I'll be right back. All right, so I've gone ahead and gone through every single instrument and articulation that we've set up in our previous videos and gone ahead and done specifically the audio trick as well as the visual waveform trick to kind of nail in when that sample sound pretty much starts right on the downbeat, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead and go back to the screen here and share with you the settings that I've got. So this is going to be a little bit of a cheat sheet for you, but even though I'm giving this to you, I would really recommend that you go through them anyway. You're going to have to do them with the other libraries, and then again, this is per my taste, right? So you might want to be a little bit behind the beat, maybe a little bit in front of the beat. So it's really up to you on how you want to do it. But let's go ahead and go back to the screen here. Here we are in the DAW. So for the brass high short, I have -25. For the brass high long, I've got -18. For the brass high short octave, -15. Brass high long octave, -20. Brass short low, we have -37. Brass low long, I have -33. Brass low short is -13, excuse me. Brass low long nasty is -25. Brass mid short, I've got -20. And brass mid long, I've got -9. Okay, so that's our brass. So let's go ahead and jump over to our woodwinds and see what we've got there. Woodwinds high short, I've got -25. Woodwinds high long, we've got -27. Woods high short arranged, -24. And woods high long arranged is -27. All right, moving on to our strings. Strings spiccato, we've got -11. Strings spiccato stack is -14. Strings pizzicatos are -10. Strings colegno short, we've got -10. Strings long, I've got -33. Strings long CS, we've got -43. Strings tremolo, I've got -21. Strings low octave shorts, I've got -11. And the last one, strings long octave, I've got actually a -115, so -115. This one was very draggy, very long. There was a lot of space in the front, so I really had to spend a few extra minutes to make sure, because -115, that's a lot in my opinion. So I had to really make sure that I had that right, but that's what I came up with, -115. So now that I've got this in my template, I've gone ahead and saved it. So now I don't necessarily have to do this ever again, unless I'm starting another template from scratch. But as long as I have this template and I start to build on top of this template with other libraries, theoretically, I'll never have to do this again. Everything should line up straight to the grid, right on the downbeat. Okay, cool. All right. Next, what is our next step? So what I really want to do now is also show you how to kind of make sure that everything's kind of in the pocket for the right volume, right? Again, just like within different libraries, different recording practices, we can have a pretty big variation when it comes to the volume on how things have been recorded and how we hear things through our DAW. So we want to kind of keep things a little bit centered. They don't have to be exact or nothing, but kind of in the ballpark so that we don't have to do any major adjustments down the line. We can just compose, put in our MIDI, export our audio, and we know that everything's going to be pretty much in the ballpark. And in order for that to happen, we really need to go ahead and look at every individual channel, make sure it's there within a certain volume range so that we don't have to do that again. So let me go ahead and show you what I'm talking about. All right, so here we are in our mixer window, okay? And we're gonna go ahead and take our very first instrument, the brass high shorts, and see where that's coming in. If I open up the contact window like you see right here, how do we set it? Our volume coming in is at 0.0. So it's pretty much right there where it should be. We're gonna get a lot of presence from there. It's not gonna be very faded. So let's go ahead and play some notes on here and see if this is coming out. Yes, okay, coming out great right there, right? Okay, but now if we go back to our mixer window, we can kind of see where things might be when we're actually playing it in. So right here, I'm gonna go ahead and zero out, and let's see what this is coming in at. So I'm pressing those keys relatively hard. Okay, great. So if I'm playing one single note, it's probably coming in at about -20. If I play a couple notes together, there's more volume, and it's probably coming in around 17. So that's kind of where we want to be. I would say it's a good rule of thumb to kind of be in the -18 to -16 range when you're getting the power from the volume. So this one is pretty decent right now, okay? So I probably wouldn't go ahead and touch that one. But let's go ahead and go now to our strings low octave on the other end of the spectrum. Let's see where we're setting that at. That is at -1.1. So I'm going to go ahead and bring that up to basically -0.1, which is essentially 0. Let's close that out. We'll zero out this track and let's see how this sounds. Okay, so this is coming in pretty hot. This is coming in at -10. So again, we want the range to be about -18 to -16, probably at the most, okay? So there's two ways we can go about doing this. We can go ahead back to our contact window and lower this down by, let's say, maybe 5, 6, 7 dB if we wanted to do that, okay? Or if we wanted to keep this at 0, we could, in Cubase anyway, adjust our gain to do the same thing. So we're gonna go ahead and put let's say we're gonna put -7.4 for right now. And let's just see how that might work. So I'm gonna zero this out. If I play the same thing, so less volume is coming out, and as you can see, we're now around -17.9. So somewhere around there. Let's make another small adjustment. And if I say let's say 6, and let's go ahead and play that one more time. So my recommendation is about -16, -18, somewhere in that pocket. But it's completely up to you where you want to go ahead and set your template. That's where I'm going to go ahead and set mine. So now we have to go through all of our tracks to see where they're landing. And then that way we can go ahead and know that everything's going to be pretty much in the pocket whenever we're ready to compose. So I'm going to go ahead and reset all this right now to the levels between -18 and -16, and I'll be right back. Okay, folks, so I've gone ahead and gone through all my tracks and adjusted the volume on everything. Now, just so you know, in my contact window of all of my instruments, I pretty much left the volume in the contact at 0. The reason I did that is because I don't necessarily want to have to go back into my contact window every single time. So I've left everything 0 across the board. In Cubase, there is a section where I can do pre-gain, post-gain sort of stuff where I can adjust the gain in the mixer. Let me go ahead and show you what that's all about. So if you look at this section up here at the upper top, you'll see that there's these gains here where I can turn down the volume, the gain, or turn up the gain if I needed to, okay? So I've gone through all of these and adjusted accordingly. So more or less, I'm in the pocket of about -18 to -16. Does it have to be exactly between those two? No, of course not. It could be -20, maybe -15, stretch out a little bit, but I'm just giving you kind of like an idea of where you could go ahead and put it on. Because once you start composing and adding all these instruments and all the sounds start to build up, the volume in our stereo out in our master bus will increase. So it's really going to get up there. So it's a good thing to kind of start a little low, things build up to just around where you kind of might need them, okay? So this is what I've gone ahead and done right now, okay? So if I play any instrument right here, you can see this is -13.8. And on the gain here, I've actually turned it down -8 dB. So it's easy for me to adjust here in my mixer window than to have to open up another window in Contact and have to do that whole process. So I've elected to go about doing it this way, okay? If I have another one, the Woods High right here. There we go. So -16.9. So it's pretty much right there in the pocket. Let's try strings long. All right, so that's -18.1, just to give you an idea where things are kind of sitting in right here, right? And that one I turned down -3 dB on that one. So I'm pretty much done right here adjusting my volumes across the board. Okay, now so far we've done a lot of work so far on this template, okay? But there's still a little bit of a ways to go. So let's talk about two more things on this episode, and then we're going to cut it off. So if you really want to hone in and really nail in this template, there's two more things we can do to these tracks at this stage of the game, and that is adding EQ and adding a compressor. Okay, and we would add that EQ and compressor to each individual instrument track that we've got going here. So why an EQ and why a compressor? Well, the EQ is going to kind of control certain frequencies that we might not like. We might be able to use subtractive EQ by taking away some of the mids, maybe some of the lows, maybe if the instrument's really harsh on the upper end, we can control that a little bit, right? So that every time we're playing this and composing, we don't have to deal with those nasty frequencies. We already took care of that at this stage, so we'd never have to do it again, right? Or maybe we want a little bit more air in a certain frequency, so we can boost just a hair a little bit on the upper frequencies in our EQ. So we're really customizing and honing in the sound that we want to get out of that particular instrument track, okay? And then the second thing on the compressor, typically dynamics are very good, right? But sometimes the dynamics can be so wide that we might want to squeeze them in a little bit so they're a little bit more useful. For example, if we have a low, like a long string patch that comes in really, really soft, right? Or let's say a pizzicato that comes in, like a Bartok pizzicato that comes in really, really loud, it might blow away our setup that we just did in the last step. So by adding a compressor, we're going to be bringing in those lows to come up a little bit, and those harsh ones, they're going to come in just a little bit lower. So we get to compress things and control things so we don't get a blowout. We've just gone ahead and spent all the time in adjusting our volume control, so we don't want to lose all that by not adding a compressor to control the dynamics just a little bit more. So I'm going to go ahead and show you about adding an EQ and a compressor to a channel. And if you would like to do this, you can go ahead and add this to each one of the individual instrument tracks. So here we go on to the next step. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and start adding some EQ to one of these tracks so I can show you how I go about it. And then you can go ahead and add this to all the tracks if you would like to go this far in your template, okay? So I'm in Cubase Pro 11 right now, and the typical, the stock plugin for EQ is called Frequency. Let me go ahead and show that to you real quick. It looks something like this. Okay, so you're able to mess around with these little notches here, wherever you want to put them. And then you, like if I'm on notch number 6, I can control that down here. If I want to control my frequency, the Q bell, the bell, and then the gain coming down or adding if I want to do additive EQ. In most cases, we're going to do mostly subtractive EQ and maybe a little bit of additive EQ later on to add maybe a little bit more air to a particular instrument. So this, depending on what DAW you're on, if you're in Logic, it has its own. If you have Pro Tools or Studio One, but this is the one that works for Cubase, and this is frequency 2. Now, my favorite, the one that I tend to use all the time, is this one here from FabFilter. I love using the Pro Q3. This one I've just gotten used to. I like the way it sounds. It's a dynamic EQ, which is really nice as well. So we're going to go ahead and use this right here, okay? So what I've actually done is I've gone ahead and created a little bit of a loop. Let me go ahead and play that for you right now. Okay, so that's what we're going to be looping over and over right there. Now that is the string spiccato right now with the controlled volume that we've already done before, but it's a little harsh in certain places for me. You know, I think we can give a little bit more life to it, right? So I'm going to go ahead and take this EQ right now and add some notches. In the FabFilter Pro EQ3, we can just go ahead and click on the line and drag up or down, and that's created a notch. Then right here, we can select what kind of notch this is going to be by clicking here. And I'm going to do one of these that I'm going to cut off pretty much everything below about 100 for the most part. Okay, so let's see if that works so far. Let's go ahead and do that. We're going to play that. Now you can see that it's kind of getting rid of everything below this line. So everything to the left of it, it's getting rid of. Most of the sound here, as you can see visually, not much is happening below 100. So I'm just going to kind of get rid of that, clean things up a little bit more, right? The next thing I'm going to do is add another bell notch. So I'm just going to go ahead and drag here. I don't really need it to be that wide. So I'm going to go ahead and with the Q, make that a little bit skinnier. Not so wide, okay? And then right here, what I'm going to end up doing is listening to just the frequencies that I kind of want to get rid of, okay? So let me go ahead and play it. And with this little headphone thing that I've got hovering over, I can click on that, hold down, and move around, and it will show me, and it'll put out what I'm listening to as far as the frequencies. And if there's something that I don't like, I can get rid of it by doing this. Let me show you. Now I'm pushing down the button here, and it's just letting me hear what those frequencies are within that bell. So I hear that little frequency that I'm not really digging. So that's good. Let's scoop that out. So I'm going to leave that there. Maybe I don't need to make it so much. I'm going to put it down to 1. Okay, so I want to scoop out a little bit more. The classic area to scoop the places out are around 500. So let me fix my Q here a little bit and maybe go down a couple dB, and let's go hunt out for those 500s. There it is. I hear. So there's a lot of muddiness right there, right? So I want to get rid of that. So let's keep that right there, okay? And let's do one more notch. Now, depending on the instrument you're working on, you may not have to have 3 notches. You might just have 1. You might have 6. It really depends on how you want to customize that sound, right? So in this case, let's just add one more and let's just see what else we can hunt for here. Here we go. That's like a nasal quality right there, right? Around 800. Okay. But I just want to take away maybe about 1 dB of it. I don't want to make it too dramatic. Okay, cool. So this is what's known as subtractive EQ because we're taking away the strength of certain frequencies, right? So now let's add one more, and let's do one that's additive. So we're going to boost certain frequencies. Typically, we do this in order for us to add a little bit more air, a little bit more presence to the instrument, okay? So let's go ahead and do something not so wide. Now, typically the additive bells are a little bit wider, where the subtractive ones are a little bit skinnier, right? You're really getting rid of those specific frequencies, where with additive, we kind of want to just add a little bit of warmth, a little bit of glow to a particular area that's a little larger, okay? So let's go ahead and play that again and see what we can find in order to kind of warm things up or give the instrument a little bit more air. Here we go. Not much is going on up there. Maybe around 5,000, 5K right here. And we don't need it to be that much, maybe just like a dB and a half, perhaps. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. Okay, so let's do it before and after. So let's turn this off by doing bypass. And turn it on. Yeah. To me, it's a little smoother. It got more of the quality of the strings that I kind of want. A little bit more presence as far as I'm concerned from what I can hear through these speakers. So it really is going to depend what you're going to be going for. If you're doing like a horror film, you're probably going to want those nasty frequencies in there. But we're going with something a little bit more classic for this example. So we're going to go ahead and stick with that when it comes to our EQ on this particular channel, okay? Now, we're going to go ahead and do this. We're going to save this. I'm going to keep that on there, okay? So every time, the next time I open up the template, it's already there. It's set. I don't have to worry about it. Can I turn it off if I don't want to? Of course. Easily turn it off and turn it back on if I need it, okay? So there we go with the EQ. So now let's go ahead to the compressor. All right, so let's go ahead and add a compressor to this track. And let me show you a couple of options of what you can do when you're trying to control the dynamics and give a little bit more presence to your instrument track in this case, okay? So if I go to the stock compressor of Cubase, you're gonna find that it is this one here, the compressor, just simply called compressor, okay? I personally am part of the UAD ecosystem, Universal Audio. I have my wonderful Apollo X4 here that I'm in love with, and that allows me to get access to some really cool, powerful plugins through UAD. If you're part of that, I very much recommend that you take advantage of the plugins. But if you don't have that quite yet, then you can go ahead and use the stock plugins that you have in your DAW. Now, if I did go ahead and use my UAD plugin, which I tend to use this Teletronics level LA2A a lot on some of my stuff. But let's go ahead and turn this all off right now because I want to show you, we're going to keep the EQ on that we just did. But let me go ahead and show you where our levels are when it comes to this string spiccato. Let's play this loop one more time and we'll take a look. Okay, great. It's there. It's a little low for my taste. You were coming in around -22. Okay, so that's great. So what we're going to do with the compressor is we're going to bring the level up just a little bit, give a little bit more presence, but definitely control so it doesn't go too high up above, right? Okay, so let's go ahead and turn on this UAD plugin, and I'm going to show you something here real quick. If I go ahead and turn this on, and let's go ahead and play it. These are my settings that you can see here. We're seeing our gain reduction here in the level indicator. So let's go ahead and play that once again and go ahead and take a look at the levels that we have. Right now we're at -22 down here. All right, so it took the lows and brought them up just a little bit. Gave it a little bit of colorization because all compressors give their own kind of color to it. But instead of -22, we're now, the bottom is now at -19. So it's brought it up around 3 dB to give us a little bit more of that sound, right? But it didn't blow out. It didn't show, it didn't go to like -14 or anything like that. Just enough to bring things up, okay? Now, the reason I wanted to show you this is because with UAD, their plugins are very powerful, but they take a lot of processing power, okay? So it wouldn't be wise of me to put one of these on every single one of my tracks. If I end up having, let's say, 100 tracks in my template or even more, even though I turn them off, once I turn them all on, I could be using, let's just say, 40, 50 tracks, right? Well, if I have 40 or 50 individual instances of this particular compressor on all of those, my system's going to crash. UAD is just going to stop working, even though I have one of the special boxes that allows a little bit more memory. It's going to crash. So in this particular case, with my template, I would not want to use the UAD simply because it's just not gonna, it's not sustainable in that sense, okay? So because of that, I'm gonna go ahead and elect to use the compressor from Cubase, my stock compressor, okay? Because this one I can use across the board without it taxing my system too much, and hopefully it won't really crash with those 50, instrument tracks, okay? So let's go ahead and listen to this again. Remember, we started at -22 without any compressor, right? So let's go ahead and turn this on, and let's play it again, and let's see where we end up. All right, so this one had a little bit more power because of the settings that I gave it, and this is bringing us up at -16. So a couple more. I have more controls on this compressor than the other one. I can do the dry mix here. Right now we had it at 50%. Maybe my threshold, I can, maybe turn it down just a little bit more. Change the ratio. The attack I have at 40 milliseconds. The release I have at auto release right now with this button here. So this is just to give you a little bit of an idea. Now with this compressor, did it come out a little bit more powerful? It did. It was definitely a lot more present, right? And if that's what you're going for, then that's great. But I would really recommend to use the stock compressor on this sort of stuff, and maybe even the stock EQ at this level of setting up your template, okay? So that's the idea right now. So we've compressed a little bit, brought up the sweep signal without blowing anything out. And that's kind of the idea of using the compressor and EQ across all of our instrument tracks. So now the idea is to go ahead and add a EQ and a compressor to all your instrument tracks. If you do so, it will definitely control your sound and take a little bit more work out at the end. Remember, going this far with setting up a template like this is really all about saving time at the very end. All your time is going to be mostly dedicated to your composing and getting your job in on time, okay? So you don't have to worry about all this busy work because it's already been set up in your template here. Okay. So hopefully that helps. That gives you a good idea of all the nitpicking work and all the detailed work that you have to put into your template. But again, at the end, it'll be very, very much worth it. So you don't really have to worry about it down the road. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Well, let's go ahead and leave it there for today. We did a lot of work today, a lot of detailed information for your orchestral template from the ground up. I hope you found it informative and useful for your own templates. I've still got some more information coming, maybe another 1 or 2 episodes. We're going to be talking about routing and maybe a little bit of a premix. Again, all in the idea of saving you time so you can focus on your composition and getting that composition in on time. Okay, so that's what we're doing, saving all that time at the end. So if you like this information, please do go ahead and give it a thumbs up. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel because we've got a lot more information, a lot more episodes coming down the line. And until then, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much again for stopping by. My name is Santiago Valencia, and until next time, it's been a real slice. Have a great night. Take care.